Okay. Or not. Okay. Just download the last on the side.
This is like a game of whack-a-mole. One video comes up and another goes away.
Yep. It's a great idea.
Okay. Emily, are you still here?
I am 100% still here. I'm sorry. I am.
Okay, no worries. Should we go ahead and get started?
Yes.
I suspect we'll have a few more people. I know a few were coming as well. So I think we'll have more joining in. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for this event with Commissioner Weintraub from the Federal Election Commission. I'm Stephen Nelson. For those who don't know me, I think everyone does. I'm one of the founding members in the organization. So yeah, so for today, as many of you are probably aware, campaign finance is a topic that is discussed quite frequently in politics, but isn't necessarily given significant time in law school. I'm not aware of any school that has a class on the topic specifically. So with that in mind, we're honored today to be joined by Ellen Weintraub, who is commissioner with the Federal Election Commission since 2002 and a 3-time chair of the commission, to speak about careers in the field of campaign finance and government work more generally. So Commissioner Weintraub has been a leading advocate for meaningful campaign finance law enforcement and robust disclosure, and has degrees from Yale and from Harvard Law School. So, and sorry, also I grabbed your bio off your website. She's also of counsel to the political law group of Perkins Coie and counsel to the House Ethics Committee. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's great to
and
be here.
Yeah, I think I spoke with Tom a bit about this, and he said you'd be willing to just speak for a few minutes off, kind of to start, and then we'll go into Q&As after that.
That sounds great. It's a pleasure to be here, virtually. Yep. At Wayne State, former home of the your great Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. I'm just a big fan of hers. The last election was quite a thing. We don't do election administration at the FEC, but I obviously am interested in elections. I follow it pretty closely, and it was pretty amazing. I was so concerned at the beginning of the year that the election was going to be a complete disaster because people would be afraid to go out and vote, and there wouldn't be opportunities. And thanks to the great efforts of people like Secretary of State Benson and many of her colleagues across the country, Democrats and Republicans, the election administration apparatus really rose to the challenge. Private sector stepped in to try and help. They donated resources where Congress was actually a little bit on the lax side on that. It was estimated by the Brennan Center at the beginning of the year that it would cost an extra $4 billion to run the election, and Congress generously appropriated $400 million. But the Chan Zuckerbergs kicked in actually about as much as Congress did. Arnold Schwarzenegger gave out grants. Basketball teams donated their stadiums. A lot of administrators around the country expanded vote by mail, which was incredibly popular and helped to make it ultimately the highest turnout election ever. Highest turnout in percentages for 120 years, which I think is, they say that because that's as far back as we have statistics, but it was certainly the highest number overall. And unfortunately, we're now facing a bit of a backlash against all that high voter turnout, where we're seeing bills introduced across the country by legislators who are trying to actually make it harder to vote, which, there was some debate at the beginning of the year as to whether it was important to adopt vote by mail on a permanent basis. And I thought, well, get it in place for this election when we need it, and because voters are going to love it and they're going to demand it. And I really did not anticipate that there would be this backlash where legislators would say, oh my God, too many people voting. We need to make it harder. With Georgia being the first big example of that. But I think there are also bills being introduced in Michigan. And, you saw that brave local administrator, what was the name? Aaron Vander, yes, Langerveld, I forget his name, but you know who I'm talking about, who stood up and did the right thing. And there were people across the country who did the right thing. And then he lost his position. He was replaced by somebody else. People are getting a lot of backlash. So, we saw Raffensperger and Kemp in Georgia, who stood up and defended the results of the election, as well they should have, but then turned around and backed this restrictive voting bill. So crazy year in election administration, and of course also a crazy year in money and politics. We don't have the final numbers yet, but it's been estimated that the total was over $14 billion that was raised and spent on the federal election alone. That's not even counting, what happened at the state level, which is phenomenal because in 2016, it was $6.5 billion. And if you want to get a sense of comparison of, the increase from 2012 to 2016, it went from 6.3 to 6.5 billion. And then it went, now 2016 was a weird election money-wise. Trump got a lot of free media and didn't raise as much money as other candidates have in the past. But so the 6.5 was probably a little bit lower than people were anticipating, but I don't think anybody anticipated there was going to more than double in 2020 for a total of over 14 billion. And that was driven in part by the presidential race, but also by some phenomenally expensive Senate races. And there was frankly a lot of wasted money in there. There was a lot of what came to be called fundraising, where people were just enraged by something that somebody said and would just say, oh, I got to give more money to that guy's opponent. A lot of money was poured into the Kentucky and South Carolina Senate races, which on the Democratic side, and those were races that probably Democrats never really had a serious chance of winning. The polls were also way off base. Susan Collins was never polled ahead and then won in a walk. So, again, that drives money. People thought, oh, we're going to win. There's a chance of picking up that race. So they pour money into the race. But it turns out that the polls were just completely off base. And then, of course, we had the billionaires. We had Mike Bloomberg, who managed to drop $1 billion of his own money in the span of about 4 months. I don't even know how he did it. I really don't know how it is possible to spend $1 billion over the course of four months. And I think he won delegates in American Samoa. But other than that, he did not actually win any delegates in any states for his $1 billion. He did not put in a particularly impressive performance at the debate. And I think that really did kill his efforts. But, things like that, okay, so there was an extra billion that, okay, maybe we discount the billion that Mike Bloomberg spent, and Tom Steyer also spent, let's see if I have the number, 345 million, most of which, again, was self-funded and didn't get him very, very far. There was a lot of small dollar donations raised. There was, on the one hand, a lot of small dollar energy, also obviously a lot of high dollar energy on there were billionaires who spent millions and tens of millions of dollars, some of them, to try and affect the outcome of the election. But there also was an extraordinary amount of small dollar energy. So if you look at Biden, who raised almost $938 million, again, breaking every record by a long shot. Let's see, there was 561 million of that 938 came in contributions of under $200. So that's kind of amazing. Similarly, Trump raised almost $596 million, of which 368 million came in donations of under 200. So there's a lot of small dollar energy, which I think is good because it's hard to corrupt somebody with a $200 contribution. It just, nobody, the candidate, there's no transaction involved there. The candidate's never going to know who those donors are. you compare that to what happens with the super PACs and the, millions of dollars that get donated there. I can assure you the candidates all know who the big donors are and who's giving millions of dollars. And those phone calls always get answered. So that's the Supreme Court says ingratiation and access isn't corruption. I'm not sure I agree with them on that. I do want to, I was disturbed when Steve said that there aren't any campaign finance classes. I think that can't possibly be true, but definitely campaign finance is covered in election law classes. There are general election law classes which do cover campaign finance. I don't know whether you've got classes like that at Wayne State. I know when I dating myself, when I went to law school, there was none of that. In fact, they recently gave an award to Richard Briffault at Columbia, sort of a lifetime achievement award. He taught the first election law class ever. And my husband was one of his students at Columbia in his first year of teaching. So he was just doing admin law back then. He hadn't developed his election law portfolio, but it has now become, now it's a big deal. Now there are lawyers really across the country who work in campaign finance at the state and local level, as well as at the federal level. There are some major federal practices that are based in Washington, but there's also big practices in California that are very well known that we could talk about. In terms of public service in general, I really want to give a strong pitch for that. I've worked in the private sector and the public sector, and my public sector work has been far more rewarding to me. It's when you work in a law firm, you sometimes have clients who got in trouble because they weren't, very sensitive to their legal obligations. And, when I work in the government, my client is the American people. And that is the best client to have. I never have to worry about what somebody wants me to do. I only think about what the best policy is for the country, and that is really quite a privilege in the law to be able to be guided by that and that alone in my decision making. So I am a big advocate of public service, and there's tons of ways of doing it. I happen to work in a federal agency. I've worked on the Hill also. I regret that I did not clerk, because then I could have had the trifecta of working in all three branches of government. I've only worked in two, but I do think that there's a lot of other opportunities at the state and local level, at the international level, as well as other ways of serving your community. It doesn't have to be working for a government organization. There are lots of great nonprofit organizations out there. And I really have found the work to be very rewarding personally. So I will shut up at that point and try to make this more valuable for you by letting you ask me questions or tell me what you want me to talk about. Happy to talk about anything.
Well, I have plenty of questions, but I'll open it up to everybody else first, and just so I don't dominate the whole time. So if anybody else has one, otherwise I can jump in whenever.
You're also welcome to type your question in the chat. If you can't unmute yourself at the moment, feel free to do that as well.
So if other people are hesitant, I can jump right in. So I guess one of my questions is, like, what does a career in campaign finance look like in terms of, like, I don't know, there's kind of a number of ways that I was thinking about asking this, but, like, what is it? How does campaign finance work vary with an election cycle? That's like kind of one thing that I've been interested in, of, like, is there a downtime in the odd years and like really busy in the even years, or like how does that tend to look on a day-to-day and year-to-year basis?
All right, so I'll answer that two ways. From the standpoint of the government at the FEC, often we will get deluged with complaints about campaign finance violations right in the run up to the election. And then in the off years, in the non-election years, is when we have a chance to dig into those complaints and try and deal with them. So there is a cycle to it. Sometimes we get to catch our breath actually at the beginning of the election year, because we've made it through the wave of complaints that came from the last election year, and the new election year hasn't really, the new election complaints haven't started to roll in yet. But it's the reality is that people are raising money all the time, for speaking just at the federal level, House races every 2 years, every member of Congress and all the people who want to run against them, they're constantly raising money. They are always what we call in cycle. And then a third of the Senate, usually traditionally senators really gear up their fundraising operation in the last 2 years of their 6-year term. So, that's when they are considered to be in cycle. But that's getting longer, and presidential races used to be, sort of a 2-year, again, like a 2-year operation. But I don't know if you've been reading the same things I have, but really almost as soon as the election was over, we started to see stories about, this person and that person positioning themselves for 2024. And that happens every time. And it always kind of makes me crazy, because I just want to take a breath after the election and, say, okay, we've got a result. It's good. We're done. We can move on and, look forward to governing for a while. But, somebody's always running. So as long as people are running, there are always people raising money. And as long as people are raising money, they need legal advice on how to do that. Obviously, the advertising picks up as you get closer to the election. And then there's, for campaign finance lawyers, the last couple of months before the election is a very intense time in the private sector advising all their clients, because there's a constant stream of, oh, we want to run this ad. Is this okay? If it's paid for from this pocket, if it's paid for from that pocket, and this entity or that entity pops up and says, hey, we would like to, get involved in this issue or get involved in this race. Are we allowed to do that? So it definitely picks up right before the election, but I don't think there's ever a downtime. It is just, there's so much money being raised and spent all the time, that it's just a never ending cycle.
So what does that look like? So you described two different kind of, or like two different kind of roles that we might serve if we're working in this: the people that are on the campaigns and seeking the advice, and the people that are at the FEC or other government agencies that are providing advice. What do kind of each of those, like, what does the work look like for them? Like, so how do you respond to, how does your staff respond to requests for advice?
Okay, so at the federal level, and then there are, state agencies and also local agencies that are involved in campaign finance. But for us, we've got a variety of functions. Our paramount function is making information available to the public. So we have a staff of people that most of the reports are now filed electronically. But they have to be reviewed. They have to be, we have to make sure we have a system in place to keep them online. We've got IT staff, we've got analysts, we've got lawyers who review complaints or draft policy proposals. You guys are probably most interested in what the lawyers do. So what the lawyers do, we have 4 divisions. We've got litigators who, when we get sued, when somebody wants to challenge a provision of the law, the way they do that is by suing the FEC. Because we are it's like we're suing for an injunction against the FEC for them not to enforce this provision of the law, is one way that it might go. But even if it's just a facial challenge, this law is unconstitutional, the way they bring that is to sue the agency that administers the law. So we have defensive litigation like that. And we also have offensive litigation, because we have an enforcement function where anybody can file a complaint. Our lawyers review those complaints, make recommendations to the commission as to what to do with them. Does it require an investigation? Is it really just crap and we should dismiss it? Do we have all the facts in hand, and we can go straight to trying to negotiate some kind of what we call a conciliation agreement, what, in other contexts would probably be called a settlement agreement. is there another government agency that is involved with this? So is there a, sometimes the Justice Department will also be investigating the same conduct, and they will ask us to stand down, abate what we're doing while they investigate. And we usually will do that because they can throw people in jail and we can't. So we have our enforcement attorneys that work on the complaints, on analyzing them, making recommendations, doing the investigations. We have our litigators who defend us in court when the agency gets sued, but also if the enforcement function breaks down, if we cannot negotiate a settlement with somebody, we can take them to court and sue them. And we recently had a case in Florida where we won something on the order of $450,000 from a candidate who had been involved in a scheme to run a fake candidate, something. This is not the one that you just heard about. This is another one. But that was a good case. That guy was a bad actor, and he was not very cooperative with us. And I'm glad that we were able to achieve some justice there. We also have policy attorneys who draft regulations and draft responses to advisory opinion requests. Anybody can request an advisory opinion from the commission, which if they have a specific thing that they want to do, there's a specific transaction they want to engage in, and they want to make sure that it's legal. So they will generally write to us, and lawyers on the art side will prepare those requests. They write to us and they say, hey, I would like to do X, Y, or Z. Here are all the reasons why I think you ought to tell me I can do it. They, sort of lay out their own argument. And then our lawyers look at it and decide whether they think they're right or not, and will draft responses for the commission. Sometimes there will be multiple responses because different commissioners might think that the answer is different. And then we have an administrative law unit that handles things like FOIA requests and HR type situations. We have a legal problem over an employment situation, things like that. So we have, I don't know, probably about 100 people in our legal department. And that's generally what they do. I see Calder has his hand raised.
Yeah, along similar lines, you encouraged us to get involved in public interest law. And in between kind of the two major tracks, whether it's government or kind of like nonprofit work, what kind of considerations do you think we should be thinking about when deciding which to pursue? So I worked at Follow the Money for a while, so I know nonprofits have their own, struggles and opportunities, and I'm sure it's the same for you as well. I mean, the FEC just got quorum back, so there are political struggles when you go the government route. So what kind of things do you think we should be thinking about?
Well, I think it depends on where you want to live. It depends on it depends on what kind of work you want to do. I have not worked in the nonprofit world, so I don't have a lot of experience with that. I'm guessing that government is maybe a little bit more stable, maybe a little bit more job security. I'm pretty sure the money is better in government than it is in the nonprofit world. But some of my heroes come out of the nonprofit world. Some of the litigators at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, at the ACLU, have really done extraordinary work. So I don't know, if I had an opportunity to work with one of the lead agencies, that's the lead nonprofits that's really doing path-breaking work, that would be appealing. It also depends on, I'm speaking about government service more broadly. It depends on what kind of law you want to practice, whether you want to be a litigator, whether you want to be sort of a sit at your desk and think deep thoughts kind of lawyer. We have people like that. They're really valuable. Not everybody is a courtroom lawyer or is good at that. I think Yeah, I'm thinking about the people that I know at the agency, and we really have a variety of skill sets, but it's good because we need those different kinds of skill sets. The government employment process is bureaucratic. It takes a long time. It's, you have to jump through a lot of hoops and get background checks and stuff like that. Uh, I think there are a lot of agencies where the work would be boring to me. I like what I do. I like what the FEC does. We deal with constitutional issues on a daily basis, and that is not something that a lot of lawyers can say. But I also think there aren't millions of opportunities out there. So at the time that you're looking, you have to see what's out there in the places that you're willing to live, and make a judgment about which ones best suit your long-term career goals.
And then just a quick follow-up on that. So if you're interested in going the government route, for instance, are there any steps you recommend us take outside of just kind of looking at the job opening boards?
USA Jobs is most jobs show up there, but I like anything else, you network, talk to people, talk to as many people as you can who are doing anything close to what you're doing, because they might be able to give you tips about, oh, watch this because I think we're going to have some openings coming at this time or that time. And then there are sort of there are also government jobs that don't go through the same bureaucratic process. So every commissioner at the FEC has a small personal staff. I have 2 lawyers who work for me, but I can hire them because it's kind of a weird setup where they are in civil service jobs, but they're kind of like political appointees because they work directly for a political appointee. So I don't have to go through those same hoops when I hire people. I have generally because I think I get a wider selection. I don't want to choose just from, oh, this guy happens to know another guy. I'd like to open it up more broadly, but so there are, sort of unique jobs like that go through a more political process. Obviously, right now there are jobs in the Biden administration that, that is a transition website that has like 10,000 resumes in it, but why not? You could try that. There's also jobs on the Hill, which, I worked on the Hill for 6 years and I loved it. It was a whole lot of fun. It's hard work. The pay scale varies. There are some people who make very little money on the Hill, and there are other people who make a very decent salary. As a lawyer, you would probably be not making at the bottom of the pay scale, but those jobs are the hours are long often, but they're, again, it's really gratifying work. You're working on legislation, you're working on issues that affect the entire country. So I think that's another route that I would recommend. Or working in state government too. There's good work that can be done in fact, sometimes the more interesting work is being done at the state and local level. Sometimes Congress has a hard time getting things done, but often we will see really interesting ideas percolating up from the state and even sometimes the local level.
Thank you.
Could you speak a little bit more on that point, and specifically just of like I think it's very easy to kind of see what federal practice, or to speculate at least as to what federal practice kind of entails, but like how it differs from the state level, and like, is there movement between lawyers in that career, like where they bounce between state and federal campaign finance work, or is it mostly you kind of pick a track and you're in there, or how does that play out?
I think there's been some movement. Certainly there are commissioners at the FEC who have come from state agencies. And I think we've also had staff who've come from state agencies. If you want to look at issues like public funding and matching programs, New York City really pioneered that kind of public funding program for the entire nation. There's been some laws on trying to limit money coming through foreign influence corporations, corporations that have significant amounts of foreign ownership. This is an issue that I've been interested in. I wrote a New York Times op-ed about it in 2016. And as a result of that op-ed, some other folks got interested in it and they introduced a local ordinance in St. Petersburg, Florida, of all places. And that was the first law on this in the country. A similar law was subsequently passed in Seattle. And now the state of Colorado is considering, and I think a couple of other states as well, possibly Maine. So sometimes really interesting ideas start at, well, I think it's an interesting idea, start at the local level and then they move up to the state level. And often if an issue is picked up in enough states, then it'll percolate up to the federal level. So definitely ideas are coming out of the states and localities. But I think there's also, there's definitely some movement that can be accomplished between state and local and federal agencies. I think if we were looking at people, somebody who came in with a strong background at the state level, I think that would be a strong candidate for at our agency.
I got another one. Oh, you want to go, Emily? Sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah, I can't raise my hand because I'm the host, so I'm like trying to jump in here.
You could do that.
So my question, I kind of wanted to go back to something that Calder had said. He had asked about, I think, more like experiences that would prepare you or like getting into the work. I'm more interested in what kind of skills are best to develop or focus on in law school or in even early legal career to lend well to campaign finance work.
When I've been hiring, I look for smart people who can think creatively and write well. I have hired people who, and the agent, I'm not in charge of all the hiring for the agency, but I have hired a number of people over the years working for me, and I've had some input into some of the agency hires. And I think in both settings, we're not necessarily looking for somebody who has a huge background in campaign finance, because you can learn that. You can learn any area of the law. And, odds are when you come out of law school, you're not going to know that much about any you've got a smattering of a lot of things, but yet don't have a lot of experience. So the question is, have you demonstrated that you are a smart and creative thinker? Can you express yourself well orally and on paper, or in writing? I don't know, do people use paper anymore? It's, the same skills that would make you I look for good lawyers. And, if I get a good lawyer, I can train that lawyer in campaign finance law. They can learn that stuff. It's a body of law that can be learned like anything else. So I don't think there are any unique skills that would qualify one for campaign finance. I think that, I do look for people who seem to be interested in what we do. So, I would look at either internships or part-time jobs or summer jobs or volunteer opportunities in related fields. When I just went through this, we were looking at people for summer internships and had too many applicants. And one of the things I look at is, well, is this somebody who seems to be interested in politics? Are they interested in, now, if you're looking to get into the federal government, sometimes having something that clearly identifies you as a partisan, there are pluses and negatives on that. Some people like that, some people don't. I like to see somebody who looks like they're actually interested in politics, because I figure that, what I have to teach this person is going to help them in their career, as opposed to somebody who's just sort of vaguely looking for a job. Cover letters are important, by the way. I always read the cover letters. I care a lot about, some people think, they just dash it off, it doesn't matter. But if I get a pro forma, and this is actually something that I was talking about with my staff just yesterday in comparing two very close candidates. Well, this person wrote sort of a generic cover letter, and didn't really say anything that was unique to this position. And another person wrote a very specific cover letter that showed that she had done some research. She knew who I was. She knew what I had done. She, she claimed to have been following my career for years. I don't know whether that's really true, but I gave her points for at least before she wrote the cover letter. She looked me up and knew what I had done and what issues were important to me. So, I like, somebody who does their homework, that shows that they are really interested in and are willing to put in some effort into trying to get that job. And another thing that really will get your resume tossed in my office anyway is proofread it, make sure you would be surprised. An otherwise highly qualified candidate gave me a resume and writing or cover letter. I forget where it was, but there were typos in there. And then, I think, really, you didn't take the trouble to proofread this before you sent this to me? That doesn't show me that you really care that much. That looks like something that you dashed off quickly. Now, I understand people make mistakes. You can, I was in a hurry to get it in before the deadline, so I, didn't, double proofread it, but you should always proofread it because typos really make you look sloppy. And I care a lot about attention to detail. So I figure if they didn't have attention to detail, even in their application letter, if you have something fun or interesting about yourself that you can highlight in your cover letter, that'll make you stand out. One of my, the guy who's now my chief of staff, claims that he spent 2 days working on the cover letter when he applied for the job, and it was witty and funny and I read this letter and I thought, I want to meet this guy. He sounds like fun. He sounds like an interesting person. So, if you can distinguish yourself to make yourself stand out from the crowd, either by the way you write or by telling something about yourself that would make you uniquely appropriate for this position, or just that you paid enough attention to try and figure out what goes on at this agency. We've had people apply for jobs at our agency who it was pretty clear in the interview they really didn't know what we did, and that's just, you got to do your homework. That kind of stuff really does show. So
Calder, did you still have a question?
Yeah, I was kind of on more like a substantive question on campaign finance. I was wondering what you view as kind of the most interesting or important issue right now. I know there's tons of them, whether it's defending contribution limits or foreign money coming in or dark money, or it's pushing more for small dollar donor programs. What do you view as interesting if we're, I don't know, looking at like writing a law review article or something?
all of those things, also the role of technology, which is really changing both how money is raised, how money is spent, how politics is, how people seek to persuade people, how they reach out to their voters. And, there were some really interesting issues and difficult issues coming out of the last election. To what degree should the tech platforms be moderating the speech of people who are running for office? What if they are not telling the truth? Should they do anything to limit the reach of information that is false and potentially dangerous? If it is coming from a politician, does that change the analysis? Is there any role for government in regulating that, or does it all bump up against the First Amendment? I think the technology issues are really kind of cutting edge right now and are difficult. I struggle with them as well, but I'm also, really interested in what's going on in dark money and possibilities of foreign money creeping into our elections, and what counts as money, as something of value that comes into the election. That's an issue that I think a lot about.
Do you have greater hope that there's going to be progress at the federal level now, or is it at the state level ground up?
I don't know. Obviously, I think there's a lot of great ideas in HR 1, both from a voter protection and election administration, as well as campaign finance perspective. And now it's in the Senate, and it's a 50-50 Senate, and some, I've been, people trying to read the tea leaves, are people willing to, there's a couple of key senators, are they willing to limit the filibuster in any way? Because it ain't going to pass, it's never going to make it past a filibuster. There are not 10 Republican votes for S1. It's not clear to me that there would be any Republican votes for any piece of S1. There ought to be parts of it that people ought to support. And then there's, I don't know whether the numbering is the same in the Senate as the House, HR 4, which is the John Lewis Voter Rights Act, to try and reinstate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act that got struck down by the Supreme Court to come up with new formulas that might pass muster. That, those kinds of laws used to get huge bipartisan support. The Voting Rights Act was reauthorized in the Reagan administration and the George W. Bush administration and passed by overwhelming margins, in the 90s of senators voted for it. And now suddenly you can't find a single vote on the other side of the aisle. I don't really understand it. I think it's self-defeating long term. But I am hopeful. I don't know if I would go so far as to say I'm optimistic, but I'm hopeful that at least some parts of these laws will pass, because I just think they're really critical. And it's a lost opportunity if it can't get passed this year. I don't know when it ever can get passed.
More specifically at the FEC, now that you have new commissioners on, is it how's the camaraderie? How's that working?
We're still getting to know each other. It's a new crowd. I mean, they're nice guys personally. I get along with all of them. I had become used to. I could have predicted the last group of commissioners how they were going to vote in any matter. There were no surprises. So now there are some surprises, and they go in both directions. There are things that would have been easy with the old group that are suddenly hard. But there are also cases where I think the old group would have voted them down, and this group may be willing to consider it. So we're learning. I'm not overly optimistic that we're going to, make huge inroads. So far, I mean, we had an exec session recently where we considered about 20 different cases, and I kept hearing lines like, well, we're so backlogged, we have so much work to do, we should just dismiss this case, we should just dismiss that case. And I said, okay, but at some point we got to actually move forward on something, right? Because if you're preserving these resources, if your argument is that, we can't spend our resources going after every case, then what are we preserving them for if we're not going to pursue some cases? So it's still a little bit unclear which cases they're going to be willing to pursue and which cases they won't, but it's a learning process. It's interesting.
How do you, so with that interplay, how do you convince them, or what's the kind of team inter-team discussion like? Yeah.
It's like anything else. You reach out to people on a personal level and you try and have a conversation. It's like, okay, so what are your concerns here? And, are those concerns grounded in the law? Do I have a legal argument to counteract their legal argument? There's always an argument, right? Lawyers can argue any side of it, but, then they cite to a case, I go read the case, and I'm like, well, I don't think it quite says what you say it says. This is the way I read that case. But ultimately, we'll see. It's only been a few months, and it's really early days in this group dynamic. It's interesting, you know, you got 6 people. It's a small group of people. And from those 6 people, you got to try and find 4 people who will agree on something. And what the old group did was they always voted together all the time. And so that made it even harder because you had to get all of them or you couldn't get any of them. This group, it's not clear to me they're always going to vote together all the time. So, you know, I'm trying to figure out what the dynamics are amongst them. What, you know, how are their conversations going? You know, who might be most amenable to persuasion, and will they be willing to split off from their buddies? It's, you know, it's game theory sometimes, but it's also, you know, it's interpersonal. You know, here are 6 individuals trying to get along and get something done. It's different from working in Congress where there's, you know, like a whole lot of people. There are only 6 of us. And if there's somebody you don't like, you can't really avoid them. I mean, now you can because everybody's virtual, but you just have to figure out a way to work with even the people that you don't get along with, which is a challenge. You know, with the former group there, I had my favorites, you know, people who I thought were more reasonable. So even if the answer was going to be the same, there were, you know, some people that I thought I could have a more productive discussion with than other people.
One follow-up with that. Oh, sorry, Emily, before we go on the one. How much have you thought that that's been, or like how much do you think that how much concern do you have that people are working in good faith toward the same aims, but like through different paths, or do you think they have different aims? Like how do you go with that?
Well, I mean, we do have different aims. I mean, fundamentally, I think campaign finance regulation is a positive thing for society, that the role of money in politics requires some limits. And I'm not sure that my colleagues all agree with that. You know, I think they think that less you know, I mean, part of it is just, you know, it's Republicans generally aren't pro-regulation in general. The kind of Republicans who get appointed to the FEC because they get picked by Mitch McConnell, who is the most ardent opponent of campaign finance regulation in the country, right? Excuse me, I'm not, you know, saying that to be critical, that's just descriptive. He would be proud of that designation. In fact, in the McConnell case, where when the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, otherwise known as McCain-Feingold, passed back in 2002, McConnell rushed into court to sue, and the NRA beat him. So the case should have been, the initial case challenging the McCain-Feingold law should have been captioned NRA v. FEC. But McConnell basically muscled them out of the way and got them to stand down because he wanted the case named after him, because he thought this was going to be the case that smacked down the law. As it turned out, that case was the high watermark of campaign finance regulation, and it's all been downhill since then. Most of the law was actually upheld in the McConnell decision. I personally was upset for, you know, perhaps similar reasons, because I was, when the decision came down in 2003, I was chair of the agency. So I thought it should have been McConnell v. Weintraub. You know, I was ready for him, but it was McConnell v. FEC. So, you know, he got the naming rights and I didn't. But, you know, that's a very long answer to the question of, you know, are they operating with the same goals as I am? Not always, not always, you know. And, you know, people can have, it's not, I'm not saying that people are operating in bad faith. You know, I know people who fervently believe that the First Amendment, you know, I've heard this line many, many times. What part of Congress shall make no law do you not understand? I just don't happen to think that money is speech. I think the Supreme Court got that wrong in Buckley. They got it wrong in Citizens United. And most people in this country actually agree with me. It's, you know, a majority of the Supreme Court, Republicans in Congress, it's the official position of the Republican Party. I don't mean this to sound very partisan, but it happens to be a partisan issue. I wish it wasn't, but it is. And the Federalist Society, there's a small elite group of Republican lawyers who feel very strongly on these issues that the government should not be regulating money in politics. And they believe that ideologically, but they are actually a minority in the country. Most people in the country recognize that money actually has a big influence and sometimes a corrupting influence on the way policies get made. And I can tell you that money really does affect how people vote in Congress. People are afraid of getting primaried. They are in, post Citizens United world. They're afraid of some really rich person setting up a super PAC. It only takes one. There's one really rich guy that doesn't like your position on something. You cross that guy, he can set up a super PAC and spend millions of dollars to try and get you defeated in the next election. And, politicians run scared. I see there's a question in the chat. How did you make the career change from the private sector to go to the public sector? I applied for the job. The first time I applied when I left, when I got in law school, I worked for 6 years in a law firm, and then I worked on the Hill for 6 years, and then I went back into practice for 6 years, and then I came back to the FEC. So when I first went into the public sector, it was on the Hill. And what I did was I sent out 100 resumes. This was back in the day where, it was all on paper and you had to mail it to people. But I went through and looked at every congressional committee or member that I thought I would want to work for. And I sent them all my resume. And it just so happened that the House Ethics Committee had recently passed, the Congress had recently passed an ethics law, and they needed more lawyers at the Ethics Committee. And they picked me. So it was just sort of, I didn't know they were looking, but I sent out resumes and they happened to be looking. I sent out 100 resumes and I got 3 nibbles, and that was the first job that I got offered, and I liked that job. So I took that job, and I thought that was a very cool job working for the House Ethics Committee. Plus we had fabulous office space in the basement of the Capitol, but because it's on a hill, we had this fabulous view. It was like 2 floors down from where the speaker's suite is. And we had almost as good a view, straight down the mall. It was really nice. It was a nice place to work. And then I went out into, I did that for 6 years, and then I went out into a law firm that did political law. And I was in the right place at the right time when they were looking for a new commissioner. I didn't apply for that job. It actually fell into my lap. I literally, we represented, I worked at Perkins Coie, and the firm then did, and continues to represent most of the Democrats on the Hill, including the Democratic leaders. So for these type of political appointments, the president picks the people from his party, and then the opposition leader, generally in the Senate, because they have to confirm them, will recommend people for the positions of their party. And people knew me on the Hill because I had worked there in the ethics capacity, and then I had continued to advise people. Tom Daschle was then the Democratic leader, and he was one of our clients. And I used to do trainings for his staff on how to comply with ethics laws and campaign finance laws. So his staff knew me, and it was a combination of his chief of staff and their outside counsel, who was my boss, Bob Bauer, who subsequently became White House counsel in the Obama administration. The 2 of them came up with this idea that, why don't we need a new Democratic FEC commissioner? How about Weintraub? And literally, Bob called me into his office one day and asked me if I would like to have my name forwarded to the president for a nomination, to be nominated to the FEC. I had never thought of it before. I didn't lobby for it. It just fell into my lap. I was in the right place at the right time. I'm a great believer in serendipity.
Sorry, that's great. That was a very informative answer on that last one in particular. Now I feel like I needed to like pay attention to what laws are demanding or going to require more lawyers in the government going forward. But yeah, I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're coming up on the hour. So I think we'll call it good there, but I really want to say thank you again. It's been very much an honor to have you here, as we say in the Zoom world. So yeah, if you have any other closing thoughts, I'll leave it to you.
No, I just, whatever you are, whatever you care about, it doesn't have to be campaign finance. I assume that you all are somewhat interested in campaign finance because you're here talking to me, but I cannot say strongly enough, find work that you really enjoy doing, that feeds your soul, as well as your pocketbook and your belly. You know, I have made choices at many points along the way to take a job that paid less money than I could have otherwise made, and I never regretted it. You're going to spend a lot of your waking hours working, so do yourself a favor and find work that you feel good about doing. That you feel, I get up every day and I feel good about. You know, I used to say I go into the office. I don't really go into the office anymore, but I will. I aspire to again. But I wake up every day and I know why I work. You know, I work to protect our democracy. I work to protect our Constitution. I work to make a less corrupt government and a more responsive government, and to grapple with constitutional issues and issues that are fundamental to our democracy. And I work with a small group of people. I have a small but dedicated staff, and we all are incredibly dedicated to the mission, and that is also reinforcing. Find your people, because you don't want to be the one person in the crowd who thinks one way when everybody else you're working with is working for a different goal. You're just not going to be happy that way. So find the work that feeds your soul, and I guarantee you will be a happier person because of it.
Okay, that's a great final recommendation, and thank you for doing that work, because I think a lot of the people here are of a similar mindset into what the influence of money in politics is. So yeah, again, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure as well.
All right, have a good day.
Take care, everybody. Good luck to you.